The studio went completely silent. Dr. Phil McGrath stood frozen at center stage, a yellowed envelope trembling slightly in his hands. The grandmother in the guest chair had just spoken 7 words that would change everything. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone in that room knew they weren't watching television anymore. They were witnessing sacred. "Stop the tape," Dr. Phil said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stop it right now." The production team scrambled. In 21 years of television, Phil had never stopped a taping mid-show, not once. But today, with that envelope in his hands and tears streaming down an elderly woman's weathered face, normal protocols meant nothing. How did we get here? How does a routine Tuesday taping turn into the moment that would define a career? It started 3 weeks earlier, when the show's producers received a letter. Not an email, not a phone call, but an actual handwritten letter on paper, so thin it was almost translucent. The handwriting was shaky, but determined. It came from Margaret Sullivan, a 77-year-old grandmother from a small town in Oklahoma. "I have carried something for 50 years, the letter began. "I am running out of time to make it right. I need Dr. Phil's help before I can't give it anymore." The letter didn't explain what the secret was. It didn't offer drama or spectacle. It simply asked for help with the kind of quiet desperation that experienced producers recognize immediately. This wasn't someone seeking attention. This was someone seeking redemption. Phil read the letter himself, something he rarely did with the thousands of requests the show received. Something about Margaret's words resonated. "Book her," he told his team, "and clear the entire hour. I don't know what this is, but it's important." On the day of taping, Margaret arrived at the studio 3 hours early. She carried only a small purse and a shoebox, wrapped in faded blue ribbon. Security noticed her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her belongings. A production assistant offered to help her to the green room, but Margaret declined. "I need to do this on my own," she said. "I've been doing everything on my own for a very long time." The show began normally enough. Dr. Phil walked onto the stage to his usual applause, the audience energized and ready. But when Margaret was introduced and walked slowly to the guest chair, something shifted in the atmosphere. You could feel it, the way you feel a storm coming before you see the clouds. Dr. Phil sat down across from her, and for a long moment, he just looked at this elderly woman who had traveled so far to be here. Her hands were folded in her lap, gripping each other so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. The shoebox sat beside her chair. "Margaret," Dr. Phil began gently, "you wrote to me about a secret you've kept for 50 years. Before we go any further, I want you to know that whatever you need to share today, this is a safe space. You're in control here." Margaret nodded, but she couldn't speak yet. She looked out at the audience, at the cameras, at the lights, and for a moment, Dr. Phil thought she might get up and leave. He'd seen that look before, the terror of truth-telling. But then Margaret did something unexpected. She reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph, its edges worn soft from decades of handling. She held it up so Dr. Phil could see. "This is my daughter Susan," Margaret said, her voice barely audible. "She would have been 53 this year." Dr. Phil noticed immediately. "Would have been past tense. Tell me about Susan," he said softly. "Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." Margaret took a shaking breath. "Susan was born in 1971. I was 19 years old, unmarried, and terrified. My parents were very religious, very strict. When they found out I was pregnant, they sent me away to a home for unwed mothers, 3 states away from everyone I knew." The audience was completely still. This wasn't the shocking secret yet, but everyone could sense it was coming, building like pressure behind a dam. "I gave birth to Susan on March 15, 1971. Margaret continued. "I held her for 2 hours. They let me hold her for 2 hours, and then they took her away. The adoption was arranged before she was even born. I signed the papers. I gave her away." Tears were flowing freely down Margaret's face now, but she kept going. Dr. Phil leaned forward, his complete attention focused on this woman and her. "For 50 years, I have lived with that decision," Margaret said. "For 50 years, I have wondered if she was happy, if she was loved, if she ever thought about me. I convinced myself that I had done the right thing, that she was better off without me, that a young, unmarried, poor girl like me had nothing to offer her. She paused, and in that pause, Dr. Phil saw something shift in her expression. This was where the story turned. 3 months ago, Margaret said, her voice breaking, I received a letter. It was from a lawyer, handling an estate. Susan had been searching for me for 20 years. She had hired investigators. She had submitted DNA tests. She had never stopped looking for her birth mother. The audience collectively held its breath. The letter informed me that Susan had found me. Margaret continued, she had found me 2 years ago. She had been building up the courage to contact me. She had written me letters that she never sent. She had driven past my house 3 times. But she was too afraid I wouldn't want to know her. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. Margaret, Dr. Phil said carefully, you said Susan would have been 53, past 10. Margaret nodded, tears now streaming down her face, in rivers. Susan died 14 months ago, breast cancer. She fought for 3 years, but in the end it took her and I never knew. I never got to know. I never got to tell her that not a single day of 50 years passed that I didn't think about her, didn't love her, didn't regret giving her away. The camera caught the exact moment. Dr. Phil's professional composure cracked. His eyes glistened, his jaw tightened, and he looked down for a moment to collect himself. The lawyer sent me some of Susan's belongings. Margaret said her adoptive parents had passed away years ago, and Susan never married, never had children. Everything she owned came to me. The birth mother she never got to meet, and in her belongings, I found something. Margaret reached for the shoebox beside her chair. Her hands were shaking so badly that Dr. Phil stood up and helped her, taking the box and setting it on his lap as he returned to his seat. Should I open this? He asked gently. Margaret nodded. Please, I can't do it again. I've only looked once, and it almost killed me. Dr. Phil carefully untied the faded blue ribbon. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, maybe 100, all addressed to Mom, in the same handwriting, none of them mailed, none of them ever sent. Dr. Phil pulled out one letter and looked at Margaret for permission. She nodded again. He began to read aloud, and his voice, usually so strong and authoritative, wavered with emotion. Dear Mom, today is my 35th birthday. I wonder if you remember the day I was born. I wonder if you think about me. I wonder if you're happy. I wonder if giving me away was the hardest thing you ever did, or if it was easy. I hope it was hard, not because I want you to have suffered, but because I want to know that I mattered, that I wasn't just a mistake you correct. I have a good life. My adoptive parents loved me very much, but there's always been this empty space where you should be. I don't blame you. I just want to understand. I just want to meet you once, just to see your face and know where I came from. I hope you're well wherever you are. I hope you're happy. I hope you sometimes think of me. Love, Susan. There wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Dr. Phil carefully folded the letter and set it back in the box. He looked at Margaret, and in his eyes was a depth of compassion that transcended television, transcended entertainment, transcended everything except pure human connection. Margaret, he said quietly, you came here today for a reason. What do you need from me? Margaret's voice was so small it was almost lost. I need to know if there's any way to forgive myself. I need to know if it's too late to make this right. I need to know if Susan, wherever she is, knows that I loved her, that I always loved her, that giving her away destroyed me, but I thought it was what was best for her. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. Dr. Phil stood up. He walked to the edge of the stage and spoke directly to his production team. I need everyone to clear the studio, except essential crew, and I need you to contact the organization we've worked with before, the one that specializes in late discovery adopts and birth parent grief. Get someone on the phone, right now. The audience was gently ushered out. They understood this had gone beyond entertainment. This was about healing. Dr. Phil returned to Margaret and did something he rarely did on camera. He sat down on the arm of her chair and took her hand. Margaret, I want you to listen to me very carefully, he said. What you did 50 years ago, you did out of love. You were 19 years old, alone, terrified, and you made the choice you thought would give your daughter the best life possible. That choice came from love, not from weakness. But I should have fought harder. Margaret whispered. I should have found a way to keep her. Maybe, Dr. Phil said. Or maybe Susan had exactly the life she was meant to have. You read her letter. She said her adoptive parents loved her very much. She had a good life, Margaret. You gave her that. Your sacrifice gave her that. But she died not knowing. Margaret sobbed. She died searching for me, and I was too much of a coward to search for her. Dr. Phil's grip on her hand tightened. You weren't a coward. You were protecting yourself from pain you didn't know if you could survive. But Margaret, I need you to hear this. Susan knew. Margaret looked up at him, confused. She knew you loved her. Dr. Phil continued. How do I know? Because she never stopped looking for you. If she thought you didn't love her, if she thought you just threw her away, she wouldn't have spent 20 years searching. She wouldn't have written all these letters. She was searching for love she already knew existed. She was searching for you because she felt, even across all those years and miles, she felt your love. The dam broke. Margaret collapsed into sobs that seemed to come from 50 years deep. Dr. Phil just held her hand and let her cry, let her release decades of guilt and grief and After several minutes, when Margaret had cried herself out, Dr. Phil reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card. This is the number for a grief counselor who specializes in situations exactly like yours, he said. Her name is Dr. Sarah Chin, and she's expecting your call. This show is going to cover all the costs of your counseling, for as long as you need it. We're also going to cover the costs of creating a memorial for Susan, something permanent and beautiful that honors her memory and your love for her. Margaret stared at the card in disbelief. Why would you do that? Because some things are more important than television, Dr. Phil said simply. Because you came here, looking for healing, and that's what we're going to help you find. But what happened next is something no one in the room or watching at home saw coming. Phil went back to the box of letters. He dug through them carefully until he found what he was looking for. An envelope different from the others, thicker with a different texture. Margaret, there's one more letter in here, he said, and this one is addressed to you, not Mom. Your actual name, Margaret Sullivan. Margaret's eyes went wide. That's not possible. Susan didn't know my last name. The adoption was closed. She found out, Dr. Phil said gently. She found you 2 years before she died, remember? And she wrote you this. With shaking hands, Margaret took the envelope. For a long moment, she just held it, too afraid to open it. Dr. Phil sat quietly, giving her time, giving her space. Finally, Margaret opened the envelope and pulled out several pages of handwritten letter. She began to read silently, and as she read, her expression transformed. The grief was still there, but something else emerged too. Peace, understanding, love. When she finished, she looked up at Dr. Phil with wonder in her eyes. She forgave me, Margaret whispered. She said she understood. She said she hoped I could forgive myself, because she already had. She said she had a beautiful life, and she was grateful for it, and she knew that I did what I thought was best for her. She said she loved me, even though we never met. She said she always loved me. Margaret clutched the letter to her chest. She loved me. Of course she did, Phil said, his own eyes wet. Now you're her mother. That bond doesn't break, Margaret. Not across time, not across distance, not even across death. Margaret held the letter, like it was the most precious thing in the world, because it was. Dr. Phil stood and addressed the camera directly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. If you're watching this, and you're carrying a secret, carrying guilt, carrying regret, I want you to hear what I'm about to say. It's never too late to seek healing. It's never too late to forgive yourself. And love, real love, transcends everything we think limits it. He turned back to Margaret one final time. Susan knew, she always knew, and now so do you. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 3 months later, Margaret stood in a small memorial garden dedicated to Susan. The plaque read, Susan Marie Thompson, beloved daughter, forever loved, forever remembered. Margaret visited every week, carrying those letters, reading them aloud to the daughter she never got to hold again. And for the first time in 50 years, when she spoke to Susan, she wasn't speaking into silence, she was speaking into love. Dr. Phil's words stayed with her always. Some bonds are too strong to break, some love is too powerful to fake, and some stories, no matter how painful, need to be told so healing can finally begin.